And again, the gun used yesterday was an AR platform weapon. Who the needs an AR weapon? Yes, as Americans, we have a right to bear arms, but when they wrote the Constitution, they weren't talking about weapons that could incite massacres. They were talking about weapons that took 30 seconds to reload. That means 2 shots per minute. Not an AR-15 style weapon that can shoot off 45 rounds per minute. That means in 1791, when the Second Amendment was ratified, it would take about 23 colonists with 1 musket each to do the same amount of damage that one person with an AR weapon can do in 1 minute today. That isn't normal. Like, that isn't right. 8 students and 1 teacher was hospitalized, all of whom are expected to survive. Thank God. But this shouldn't have been able to happen in the first place. Why does a child have access to a weapon like that? Why do people have access to weapons like that? Those weapons are literally meant for mass killing. And if those weapons didn't exist when the Second Amendment was written, then they shouldn't be included when referring to the Second Amendment. Plain and simple.
No, babe, Spencer, stick to screaming about random things and influencer things, because leave the politics and the constitutional law to people who have basic familiarity with it. This argument is really, really dumb. Even a sophisticated progressive thinker would never argue that just because AR-15s didn't exist when the Constitution was written and ratified, they don't apply. The Second Amendment doesn't apply to AR-15s. Really, babe? Think about the First Amendment, for example. The First Amendment, when that was written, computers, phones, the radio, TikTok, none of these things existed. Doesn't mean the First Amendment doesn't protect them. The Constitution lays out principles that are then applied throughout time. So the same way that freedom of speech now would protect your right to publish an ebook, even though ebooks didn't exist in 1776, well, the Second Amendment established the right to bear arms, and at that time referred to arms that were in common use, the same kind of firearms and technology, whether it was cannons or muskets, that a militia would have, so too could private citizens. And so the analogous thing there for the AR-15 would actually be perfectly logical, that you would be able to have one under the Second Amendment. And just because it didn't exist when the Constitution was ratified is irrelevant, babe. And if you were familiar with Constitutional Law 101, you wouldn't embarrass yourself with these kinds of arguments publicly. So maybe read up on it before you dive into these debates or something, because this is not a good look. And making this Georgia tragedy about AR-15s more broadly makes absolutely no sense. 4 people, 2 teachers and 2 students, were killed by this evil act of violence, but my friend, you could kill 4 people with a handgun, with a shotgun, with a hunting rifle, with really any kind of gun. The idea that, well, being an AR-15 is of particular note is just not really logical. I mean, some of the most deadly school shootings in American history, like Columbine, killed far more people than this and were carried out with handguns. So making it about AR-15s makes no sense. As a statistical matter of fact, AR-15s are not the problem with gun violence in America. There are more than 16 million AR-15s in the United States, but according to FBI data, just a few hundred people every year are killed with rifles of any kind. More people are killed with bare fists or blunt objects. So statistically speaking, 99.99% of AR-15s aren't used to murder anybody, okay? So we've got to stop with this hysterical blame game and constitutional illiteracy trying to make this situation about the AR-15. In reality, we should be talking about the gross and reckless, irresponsible actions of this shooter's father, giving him a gun even though he was clearly mentally disturbed, and the school missing many massive red flags. But making this about a particular type of firearm is just not justified by facts or the statistical reality of the gun violence issue more broadly. This issue is also not about government funding for programs, but that didn't stop one viral TikTok from trying to assert that the reason we have these kinds of tragedies is because we're cutting funding to healthcare and education and food stamps, which is, of course, news to me that we're doing any such thing. But let's take a listen to another interesting video about this incident.
I'm so tired of hearing politicians call school violence senseless. Every single time a tragedy happens in a school, you have a row of politicians ready to go. Oh, this is so senseless. Oh, we don't know how this happened. You don't know how it happened? It happened because of you. Literally every single time you sign a bill into law that reduces SNAP and reduces healthcare and reduces school funding and increases mass incarceration and increases mass deportation and doesn't protect housing, every single time you sign these violent bills into law, you're creating more violence in our schools. You reduce our school funding, you're increasing school violence. One hand they take NRA money, the other hand they hand out thoughts and prayers, and then at the same time they're saying to teachers, your children aren't meeting benchmarks. This school district isn't meeting benchmarks. This child isn't. How cruel and inhumane are you that you're going to look at a child that's coming to school without a pencil, without food at home, without housing, with a family that's at risk of deportation, a family member that's incarcerated, on and on and on. They're in the foster care system, anything. And you're going to look at that kid and you're going to say, you're not meeting your benchmark, as you reduce their funding and any access they have to any program that could help them. It's cruel, it's inhumane, and it's not senseless. They just don't want to take responsibility.
So this video really deeply disturbed me because this guy might not realize it, but he is essentially taking blame off the shoulders of the shooter, the sick individual who killed those 4 people, and putting it on to the shoulders of imaginary politicians who he imagines made decisions that don't exist about cutting funding to unrelated programs, and then left kids in a scenario of hopelessness that then actually almost no school shooters fit into this description. So he basically brought up a bunch of things that have nothing to do with anything, and then falsely claimed that funding to them has been slashed, and then took blame off the shooters and threw it onto the shoulders of imaginary politicians he invented. It's really quite a to be frank, yet millions of people bought this hook, line, and sinker, even though it has no basis in reality. I feel like I'm listening to somebody who lives in an alternate universe, because there is no universe where anything he described is actually true or real. We can run through the list, and I'm going to put the graphs on screen. SNAP spending, food stamps, has more than doubled since 2018. It's only gone up. We haven't cut it at all. The nationwide public K-12 student spending per student per year has only gone up, even after you adjust for inflation. It's up thousands of dollars over the last 10 years. Healthcare spending has only gone up. Taxpayer spending on healthcare expenditures has just gone up. Since 2013, it's nearly doubled, right? So on almost every count, the things that he's describing aren't real or true, yet he's somehow still asserting them to blame imaginary politicians for the acts of a deranged, sick individual. It's just mental gymnastics of the highest order. Like, I hope you didn't pull something stretching so hard. But to spread this kind of fake information and cast blame based on imaginary realities is really irresponsible and disturbing, and just not an okay thing to do in the aftermath of a tragedy. Anyway, guys, kind of in conclusion to this topic, I just have to say there aren't easy answers. There's no one law we can pass that will make this problem go away or solve it. There's not one issue. Now, I could get into and do a whole podcast on things that I think would help this crisis, and I do think it's a really profound sickness and crisis, but I do know one thing for sure. Toxic and misinformed discourse that spreads ignorant talking points and constitutional illiteracy and fake news and demonizes entire groups of people who, based on the actions of individuals, this kind of stuff does not help and only makes things worse. What do you guys think? Are you kind of shocked to see what people on TikTok had to say in the aftermath of this tragedy, or is it unfortunately about what you expected? Please do let me know in the comments.